to a shamanic experience. I'm Katie Weatherup, shamanic practitioner and solo traveler. If you believe mountains hold ancient wisdom and rivers cleanse, you're in the right place. Let's explore the energy and magic of places near and far, and I'll share practical travel tips along the way, one sacred location at a time. So my 2 trips to Peru sort of are like jewels in the memory bank of places that I've been and experiences I got to have. There was a lot of richness. So this is my second podcast about Peru because there was just so much to cover that wouldn't fit into a reasonable amount of time to listen in one sitting. So I talked in the previous podcast a lot about the discernment because there can be some magical manipulation and there can be some complexity that isn't present in something that doesn't have a living, uninterrupted magical tradition. And I think that 90% of what it means to be in Peru, with that being true, is so amazing and awesome and wonderful to get even a little bit of a glimpse of. And 10% can add complexity in ways that wouldn't happen in other environments. And so for the energetically sensitive person, having a little bit of extra awareness, just as you would to be like, when I went to Glacier National Park, oh, this is bear country. There's some ways that, you would adapt to that you wouldn't need to at Cedar Breaks National Monument, where they haven't seen a bear in years and years and years. But I want to share just some cool highlights and travel tips and some ideas about navigating your time in Peru, at least in the part that I visited. Again, it's very limited along the Gringo Trail. So this included the Sacred Valley, Cusco, up to Machu Picchu. And what I love about that is I don't feel like you have to get off the beaten track for this really potent, magical, wonderful experience. When I went back, I paid for it by taking a group of people, and I was able, therefore, to hire a dedicated bus to drive us around with a driver and a wonderful tour guide. One of the things I think that's worth knowing about doing that, if you end up hiring a driver, is that there's some deals happening in the background to take you to some specific places that are going to create a cool experience, but that there's also, I presume, a kickback for the guides in bringing the people in the door. So we ended up at a pottery shop that was really cool, but also we're probably paying 5 times the price of pottery that we would have paid if we'd been at another location. And so it's just kind of useful to know that there are these sort of spots along the way, and they weren't bad or uninteresting. They were just very much a curated experience. And so knowing what they are so that you can, make a decision about that, I think is really useful. I, of course, was way more inclined to be in magically potent spots and Incan ruins and some of the really beautiful water features that they have, and to hear about what they know or imagine about the people who lived there before. Peru in this area has a lot of really epic vistas, so you can be in spots having an experience looking out over some really wonderful things. And one of the places that I think is really worth going to, it's a little bit off the beaten path, but if you're in the Cusco area, I believe most of the cab drivers know how to get you to Temple of the Moon. So it's a little bit of a drive out of the city. It's a pretty drive. You go up really high, but that was a place that I went to both times that just has a really, really neat energy. I think they're still excavating it, but it just has some really neat energy, but it isn't necessarily showy in the same way that some of the other places are. So you might really enjoy dropping in with the energy, and it might be a little bit less crowded than some of the other places. Another super practical tip is bug spray is your friend. So for me, being in South America, I got chomped at one point by what they call no-see-ums, probably local little mosquitoes. And while the bites weren't, for my body, particularly painful, they were really warm and they lasted a long time. So they heated up and they lasted a long time. And I think that just reflected the fact that, unlike mosquitoes that I've been bitten by in North America for a very long time, my body just didn't know how to deal with this other kind of venom that, I wasn't familiar with. And one of the things at the city at the base of Machu Picchu, so the usual way that the rhythm works for Machu Picchu is the trains come and it's a beautiful, exquisite train ride. And then you get off in kind of the early afternoon. And then most people just get settled into their accommodations. They've already had a travel day. And there's a bit of an expense taking the buses up to the top of the hill where you get to see Machu Picchu, as well as a cost of admission for the day. And so most people want to, maximize their money and their time and have it be a full day so they don't head up. Meanwhile, anyone who's leaving on the train has proceeded down the mountain and is getting onto the train. And one of the really cool things in this, little town is there's some wonderful natural hot springs, and they were exquisite the first time I was there. The second time it had rained a lot, so the heat wasn't as significant as it had been the first time. But overall, wonderful hot springs. But I made the mistake of not putting on bug spray in the not inconsiderable walk from post hot springs back to the place that we were staying, and ended up with the aforementioned bug bites. So it's just good to sort of be aware of that. Also, when you're picking lodging, there's a wide variety. So for people who are a little bit more of the camping ethos, it's cool to be able to have things that are wildly affordable by modern developed country standards. But you may be at altitude in a room with no heat. And that was my experience the first time. The second time I was discerning enough to make sure that heating was included with the lodgings that I booked for the group that I took with me. And if you have someone local who's helping you to get accommodations, it's just worth knowing that there are a lot of those kind of kickbacks as near as I can tell. And so the vested interest in persuading you to go to a place is just not someone who's completely necessarily in the I want you to have the best experience. And it's just really good to understand that. I mean, similarly, if you're seeing a financial advisor, knowing that they work on commission and that they have a vested interest in persuading you to put your money here instead of this other place is just a really good transparency. So a lot of people giving financial advice that aren't working in that way will say it's really good to have a financial advisor that you pay a fee to who's not taking commission so that they don't have another vested interest. So not saying anything against that system. It's just good to kind of be aware of that, to get into lodgings that are really the right lodgings for you, that are always that balance of cost and comfort and amenities. So yeah, a random thing to be aware of. Another pro tip that I really wanted to share was I had one of the best experiences of Machu Picchu in the late afternoon, sitting in sort of the agricultural pasture area that is a little bit above the more developed part of it. So there's like the Temple of the Sun and the Moon and the condor that you can see down, and all the carving, and here's the rock quarry where they were, developing things. And meanwhile, you're looking at these gorgeous towering mountains. Like, it's just amazing. It's not surprising they put it into a lot of postcards. And knowing that train schedule that I mentioned before, Machu Picchu tends to get really much, much quieter in the later afternoon. For one thing, a lot of people really want to catch the sunrise, and I did that one of the times. I got up early. I'm not really a dawn person, but I got up and it was epic and wonderful, and I was thrilled to be at Machu Picchu as the sun was peeking over, the horizon, and I was connected with, all this energy and doing shamanic practices, and it was wonderful. I'm glad I got to have that experience. But at the same time, when you have this huge Russian influx of people and then other people who get up at a more reasonable hour, and it's not that big of a sight. Sure, there are people who go hike the really big mountain that involves ladders and such. So they go forth to have their epic hike. But you can kind of cover the whole site with a tour guide in a lot of detail in a couple hours, and then wander around and take pictures. So people are ready for lunch and coming into completion, and they feel like they've had the experience. Plus, a lot of them, need to get back in time for their train. And so the site just tends to clear out at that later time. And I found that the agricultural field, just sitting on the grass in the middle of it, and it's lovely. They don't have a keep off the grass sign, or at least they didn't when I was there, gave me this epic view, but also this chance to just not have other humans around me. Because even in a really powerful site, the loudness of other humans, we're biologically hardwired to track and pay attention to them. It's a lot harder to really, really drop in and feel things. And so I just had a really rich experience being able to just park my butt on the grass, look out over this place, and then, really commune and align and experience and let the energy move through me. And so I want to invite that, if, as far as managing your timing, not saying, don't do Machu Picchu at dawn. It's cool, but I get a lot happier remembering that time, with kind of just the llamas for company. That was just a lot more still and available in a different way. Another really powerful but not quite as pleasurable experience I had was a real different experience than what my guides usually invite me to have. And so particularly at the time, I was a reluctant exerciser. And, now in my life, I've pretty much worked that out and come with some ways to wrangle myself really successfully. And there's a lot of really great stuff in my life. But at the time, I think this was about 15 years ago, possibly a little more, that was not something that I'd worked out. And when I got to Machu Picchu, the guide said, hey, we want you to take this hike up to the Sun Gate. And it's this little Incan road that goes up to this high spot above the city. It has magnificent views along the way. You're walking along an old Incan road. And I'm like, okay, now Machu Picchu is at significant elevation. It's not as high as Cusco, but it's still considerable elevation. And it wasn't a time where I had the most water and I had to go at a certain pace because of the aforementioned not missing the train. And so I had the time to do it, but I needed to, put some giddy up in my step. And I was talking to my guides. I felt really clear and connected. And they said, look, it's totally up to you. Free choice. Of course, we respect if you don't do this, but we really want to invite you to have this experience that goes beyond your comfort zone. Because when your body gets uncomfortable, you let it stop you. And there are a lot of times that's perfectly okay, but there's some really powerful stuff in life that you're missing out on as a result of not tolerating the discomfort of having your heart rate up particularly well, which they were absolutely not wrong about. I tend to get some very, very clear but not always comfortable truth in the spaciousness that's created by travel, because you really can devote a lot more to listening to your guides and yourself, intimacy with self, intimacy with the land, intimacy with your team of guides that can really be opened in the course of travel when you aren't keeping to your daily routine and schedule and needing to get to the grocery store at this time and, those kind of things. So that's part of what I really love and that really, really feeds me about travel. I set down a lot of my to-do list for the sake of having my to experience list. And even things like food, you're up and you're looking around because you're needing to find what you're going to choose for dinner in a fresh way in these different environments. So here I am going up this trail, incredibly out of breath, walking for a little while, panting and being exhausted, starting up again before I want to. At one point I was crying because I hated it so much, which I was also kind of laughing at myself, but I was crying and laughing and I don't like this. And my guides are showing me pictures of Incan warriors just used to run right up this. And so I got to the top and then I made my way back down, made the train, no problem. And the guides were not wrong. It was a really powerful initiation of moving through and really being able to bring self-efficacy to the experience, even when I had a lot of resistance. And if you are familiar with more of the body of my work, for the most part, I'm really fond of ease and being able to be really relaxed, because when we aren't armored up, when we aren't tense, we can transform more easily. We can let go of old patterns. We feel safe enough to transform. I'm not a fan of, really harsh things for our bodies and those kind of things. That being said, I also have a cold plunge at my house because, there's a lot of really cool stuff that happens with chemistry and health and things like that. But I'm not really the let me do extreme endurance sports, or let me go fast in the desert, or, I just, I don't like being in pain. And if I am going to be in discomfort, I want to be really, really judicious. There really has to be a good reason why this is the most effective way to move with something. But it was interesting because I recently traveled to Utah, and it was the height of summer. It was in July, and I went to Bryce Canyon, and it was hot and at high elevation, not as hot as it was down in Zion, but still quite toasty. And I just got mesmerized by going down into Bryce Canyon because of these beautiful rock formations and the colors and the light. And I just wasn't going to have the same experience standing on the rim looking over things. So down, down, down I go, and coming back up, it was definitely like, this is not my favorite flavor. But the amount of struggle and distress and unhappiness was so different for this experience. And granted, I am in better physical condition now, but at the same time, there were just like moments where, my heart rate goes way, way, way high. And then I just stop and breathe and wait for it to calm down, and then, go another 10 feet up the trail and, rinse and repeat. But it was just kind of cool to have that data point of this thing that was so hard for me emotionally back at that time to be something that I was kind of laughing at myself about, like, oh, I don't like this, but this too shall pass. And I know how to work with my body. And what that unlocked for me was really powerful. So again, this takeaway isn't like, set yourself extreme challenges unless that's really your jam. I think there's so many pathways to spirituality, but there may be places you can meet yourself, that you limit yourself, that are costing you a lot of life experience. And I felt like Peru was just a really powerful and potent place to be able to hear my guides and work with some of that. So there's just a lot of richness in that particular travel experience. And I hope it's something that you have the opportunity to go in person if that's the right thing for you and this really speaks to you. There are lots of tour groups that go. I think it's really great to go with some like-minded friends. I don't know that I would do solo travel there, although I imagine it would work out just fine. It's just more of a particular preference of how much tension I might have rather than a real safety concern. But it was really valuable to me to have these opportunities to really not be in a structured environment and really get to wander and get to drop in and get to really experience the land. And if this isn't something that's obtainable, I would invite you to consider something like Shamanic Journey, where you can connect with land. And I find it easier to connect energetically with a place that I've been. That's part of the wealth of what it means as a shamanic practitioner to have traveled to these earth altars and these power spots and these places with these potent ley lines, is that I can go back in shamanic reality. I have a relationship with the guardian of the land, and I can go and I can, sort of fill my cup with this really potent land energy and release things that don't serve. When you start looking at the tradition of the mesa, often rocks come from power spots that are added to the medicine bundle because it's a direct conduit. So if you needed to do an extraction, one of the ways to do it is to use a rock from a place that could absorb, the most heavy energy that an individual could possibly hold without even blinking. There's places in the world that are very good at transmutation, and it's just, it can just get composted easy peasy, really elegantly, and the land is available for that. So a lot of people like to bring back rocks. I certainly have a lot of rocks from places that I've traveled to. And you can even ask if you have friends who are so inclined who are going somewhere to bring you a rock. It's kind of a funny souvenir, but I don't know that I've ever received an object from a place that's delighted me as much as when someone's brought me a rock from a particular power spot. It's a totally different story, but part of how I ended up putting Costa Rica where I did on the list was one of my students went to Costa Rica and was told to bring back a rock from a particular volcano, which usually volcanoes aren't mad keen on you taking rocks, but she was specifically instructed to do so. And she put it in my hands and I went, oh, I need to go see that volcano. And so hopefully I'll eventually get to the shamanic experience in Costa Rica. And I'm just so happy to have the chance to share this with you. It's been a form of content that I've been dreaming on for many, many years now. There were times I've written several books, and so I thought perhaps a book series on sacred travel, talking about different locations. And then for a while, I got really enamored with YouTube travel videos, which I still really love, but realized I don't love the complexity of cameras and trying to get shots. And it's a saturated market with a learning curve. So it's just neat to find this dream of sharing something finally coming together in podcast form. So I'm happy to have the space and the opportunity to share this with you. And check out the show notes. It's very early in the development of this particular offering, but if there's demand for it, I'll probably create some links to other more detailed information like, places that you could stay and companies that you could work with and sacred locations that I visited. It seems like it would be really fun to have a write-up of some of those resources. So check out the show notes because if I get that set up, that's where you'll find them. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. And whether you're connecting from afar or in person, I hope this really, really supports you in being able to drop in with this magnificent energy from the Andes of Peru. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.